the information that we get from the public health department comes at us every week, every 2 weeks. They make modifications to it, but it's not always crystal clear for us, and we have to interpret it and push back and make suggestions, and they push back on us. It's a collaborative conversation, but we really don't know what the answers to the questions are until we get through the process of wrestling the questions out. And it's important you understand that, because I know you know this, but these are complex issues. They're not simple to wrestle through. Bottom line is we want to do right by our kids, our families, and keep our staff safe. We're trying our best to learn from others who are further down the curve. That means states and countries that got engaged at different rates or maybe hit their peaks at different times, and they're trying to reopen. So we're learning from what's working and what's not working from them. As I mentioned before, the state guidance is typically policy-centric. So when the governor says we may open our schools in late July, those are aspirational statements. The decisions regarding when to open are actually left to the local school board. We talked about the public health department's input, knowing that it's iterative and it's short term. So every week we get new information, including some that's coming in this week that gives some indication that maybe the trend is going in not the positive direction here locally. And so they may make some further restrictions, and we're waiting for them to clarify what those might be. We talked about the LEA being responsible for local direction setting, and probably the most important bullet on this page is the bottom one. No matter what plan we come up with, it's going to need to be adaptable and scalable. This is it's a novel coronavirus, which means it's new, and we're learning about it every day, and its behavior is not 100% known. Therefore, it's hard to plan for. Until we have a vaccine and a research-based treatment for the virus, there's going to be movement up and down, and that goes to the next slide, Patrick, where we have to. We know what it's like to function as a school district in distance learning, shelter in place, and we're working towards understanding what the school system is going to look like in a post-COVID normal operations phase. I think it's safe to say that it's not going to go back to where it was. Things have changed, and we will embrace the positive aspects of that change. We will have an opportunity to make revisions to past practices that weren't overly helpful, but they were institutionalized, so there's opportunity there. But the important part of this slide is that as the virus either increases in its activity or decreases in its activity, we as an organization need to be able to toggle down and toggle up on that sliding scale to be more restrictive and less restrictive in response to the behavior of the virus. And so our planning efforts need to be scalable and adaptable and ready to move either direction as they need to. Next slide, Patrick. So I'm going to turn it over to Ahmed Sheikh Salami, our Assistant Superintendent of Business Services, who's going to talk a little bit about operations of schools.
Thank you, David. And so as David was explaining, we know that we're going to be looking at different models and options for reopening school. And foremost is going to be ensuring the health and safety of our employees, students, and parents who we interact with. And we understand that we're going to have to look at the custodial and sanitation differently, depending on the different models that we're going to be utilizing, adhering to the guidelines from our county in terms of social distance and looking at high traffic areas, and various areas in school facilities are going to be probably used differently. We know hand washing and having sanitizers is going to be critical, as well as providing personal protective, the right personal protective equipment for the staff, and what we're going to require our students to be having in terms of masks and other type of safety items. And so all of those are going to have additional cost in terms of potentially staff and materials and supplies. We also have to be thoughtful of our meal service and how that will be integrated into any model that we go down, and making sure that that program serves all students, and can be viable financially as well. We are in our 6 to 12 one-to-one next year, and we've been able to handle the technology needs of our K-5 by relying both on parent-provided devices at home, and for those students who don't have devices, we've been providing devices from the district. So going forward, we'll have to be cognizant of that in our model as well, in addition to the community and outside users who frequently use our facilities. We'll have to look at how we're going to address that. So all those logistical and support issues are really critical, and it's really important that we make sure that the model and is sustainable in terms of the support and needs as well. I think Ed Dialazzo, our Assistant Superintendent of Student Services, is next.
Thank you, Ahmad. Patrick, if you could go to the next slide, please. All right, thank you, Patrick. Talking about operations and functions, this slide talks about our registration process, enrollment, and attendance. All those things continue, even in shelter in place here in the spring. Throughout the summer, we continue to enroll new students, and we have an online process for student enrollment. One thing that will change in the fall will be our walkthrough process. And so we call it walkthrough, but it's essentially going to be an online virtual registration process for students coming in August. And so we're putting together the directions and procedures and protocol for that now. And then we will get that out to the community. We'll get that out to our staff to let all of you know how that process will look like. We have an opportunity now to do an online virtual registration. And so we are going to take the opportunity to do that, again, given the current guidance from public health. Regarding attendance next year, we are waiting for the guidance from California Department of Education. This time during the spring, we did get relief for purposes of average daily attendance, our ADA, and our attendance from the state. We don't know what that'll look like in the fall. So we are waiting for that guidance. Whatever option we choose as a district, whatever model we choose, we will need to rethink, possibly in all likelihood, a different way of how we take attendance. Given that this year in the spring, when we've determined that some students are struggling to connect with their virtual classes, or if we're finding that they're having difficulties completing assignments, we're trying to support our students, families, and our teachers to stay connected to our virtual classes as best as we can. So we're trying to establish what those supports could look like. Should we continue this model next year, or again, that hybrid model that we will talk about here in a little bit. Patrick, next page, please. Okay, so I mentioned a little bit about student connectedness. And one thing we know as educators is that if students feel safe, if students feel supported in school, they have a better chance of learning. So we want to figure out how that's going to really look. What does student connectedness look like in a virtual model? What is that or when we're lacking face-to-face structure, what's that look like to how to build relationships and so forth? So of all the publications and articles, guidance that I've read, the common theme that I'm seeing is that theme about mental health. And there is that possibility that some of our kids experience in this social distancing, and some people call social isolation, a sense of trauma. And so we need to really think about that and be cognizant of that as educators. How do we identify that, and how do we support it? So these are considerations that we need to think about as we plan for that reopening of school next year. What are the things that we're looking for to make sure that kids' needs are met if they are struggling as they return back to school? And we have some curriculum now that we use, social emotional learning curriculum, our SEL, Kimochi's at the elementary, Second Step, and then we're also looking at some other things like Character Strong curriculum to see how we can continue to support kids. Next slide, Patrick. So for students with disabilities, specifically students who are on individualized education plans or IEPs, or our students with 504s, we have a lot of things to consider. Number one, most of our students who have IEPs and 504 plans participate in the general education program for the majority of their day. So knowing that, we now need to think, okay, what do those modifications look like? What do those accommodations look like in a virtual model if we continue that? What's it look like in a hybrid model? Should we continue that? So those are the things we have to consider and plan for in terms of learning what is the best way of delivering service for students with disabilities. David mentioned earlier how the Alameda County Public Health guidance is really what we're going to be looking for in terms of, you know, what are the specific guidelines regarding you know, cleaning protocol, for example. So if we go into a hybrid model, or we come back to school with some restrictions of groupings of kids, or again, how do we clean our schools? We need to think about these things as we plan that reopening. So students with more moderate to severe disabilities, or students who are our youngest learners, like preschoolers, what's that really mean? Because there's a lot of close work being done. We're in close proximity with our students, and especially our students with health needs or significant self-care needs. We have to be in close contact with them. So what does that look like? And again, these are all considerations that we need to plan for. We're thinking about them now. We're researching the best as we can, again, from guidance from our bigger agencies, but also practitioners out there in special education. And I know our special education staff are learning as best as they can what this possibly could look like. But we will continue to participate in this process and think about all the specific needs for this special population. Patrick, I think the next slide is for our Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources, Mr. Julio Hernandez.
Thank you, Ed. Good evening, everyone. So as we go into this journey of developing our plan, part of the elements of the process is negotiating with our associations, our teachers, as well as our classified groups. So once the plan has been developed, the associations will be able to negotiate the impact and effects and possibly mandatory scope of bargaining. It's a legal requirement. We plan that these negotiations are not going to be lengthy, so that we can execute our plan and move forward. So the ask is that our associations be flexible, as we know that the plan may change depending on what the direction is from primarily the county health department. So there will be negotiations that will take place, and we will keep the community, particularly the board, abreast as how we move that forward. Thank you, David.
All right, Patrick, if you could go to the next slide. So the key question for the conversation that we want to have tonight is about what types of learning options may be needed in the next school year. We're going to go over 4 different slides. Dr. Woodward will take these that'll look at a few options that are being discussed currently by the School Reopening Task Force, which is a group of individuals, teachers, administrators, classified staff members, and cabinet members who are really the working group behind this plan. Each of the scenarios or option is subject to the guidance of the Alameda County Public Health Department. And we may lean into one or more than one based on the guidance that we're given when we get closer to the start of school. And also keep in mind that none of these options are set in stone. They're identified to give us a sense of what plans might entail as we move forward. So Dr. Woodward, are you ready to take it from here?
I am, Dr. Hagman. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Patrick, next slide, please. Thank you. Thank you all for coming tonight. We're very glad to have you here. So I just want to reiterate that these are options that we're considering and that none of these have been decided. And once again, we will receive guidance from our health department and we use that to make our decisions. So the one option is what we've been doing, except for with tighter parameters. So we've been thrust into full-time distance learning since March, and I'm very proud of our teachers and our staff and our students and families for making it through this time. The day and a half left to go of the school year. But if we were to need to go to full-time distance learning for next year, based upon guidance from the health department, this would differ from the distance learning model that we did implement already, because we realize that we need to include more clearly defined structures, routine, schedules, grading expectations. We expect that students would need to earn grades. We would hope that we understand the need for the hold harmless, but moving forward, we also know that our students need grades. So we will also be looking at, if it is a full-time distance learning model, how would we engage in meaningful assessment of student learning. So in this model, similar to what we've been doing, students would attend school Monday through Friday with set schedules. And the schedule of the learning would occur mostly during school hours, although there might be a little bit of variance with teachers, but we want to, like I said before, establish more clearly defined parameters if we were to do this as an option. And then teachers would set aside time each week for office hours. And this would allow our students who need some additional support or need to check in with their teacher to be able to do so. Next slide. So option 2 is a hybrid learning model. And once again, I want to just make it very clear that we haven't made any firm decisions on this. You'll see that we do not have any specific days of the week that are stated. We're not saying it's 2 days in a row or every other day. We're saying at this point that this is an option, that students could attend school in person a few days a week. So this is to reduce the number of students who would be in any given class or on the campus at one time in order to allow for greater social distancing. So this would also enable us to be able to implement safety guidelines and health protocols. So as an example, students might attend school 2 days a week, and then on the days that they're not in school, they would engage in remote learning at home, where they would complete assignments and lessons. And then another group of students would come in for another 2 days during the week. And then on the days when they're off, they would complete their assignments and lessons. With one potential day for our teachers to collaborate, hold office hours, and engage in professional development. This is a model you may have seen from some other school districts. We are not moving that quickly right now because we believe that there is additional information that we need to glean from our stakeholders. And I'll talk a little bit more about how we're doing that later before we make a commitment. As well, in this model, we would need for the families to provide a learning space at home where students could work when they're not in school. And then I touched upon how time would be set aside each week for our office hours, for student check-ins, and professional development and collaboration. Patrick, next slide. So option 3 is a long-term independent study program. This is different from the independent study that's short-term. So for example, currently, if you were to be doing some travel, you might be able to do an independent study for a limited number of days while your student remains in their current class. For a long-term independent study model, students would have an independent study teacher and would most likely not be at their school of residence. And this would take place all remotely. This would be available to students in grades 1 through 12 only. And then the students would participate in guided independent learning with support from their family at home. In order to pursue long-term independent study, students would be required to participate in a scheduled weekly appointment with their independent study teacher, and they would need to complete a weekly productivity goal sheet that would be outlined in their independent study contract. This is part of Ed Code. This option is best for students who are very self-motivated, who are able to structure their learning time, who are disciplined, have the support from families, and are able to adhere and complete assignments by specific deadlines and meet expectations. Because of what is in Ed Code, students cannot remain in long-term independent study if the learning goals outlined in their independent study contract are not met. As well, this would be a great option for students who maybe live in a family where someone is immune compromised, and so there's hesitancy about coming back to school in any capacity. Or for students or families that are just uncomfortable sending their child to school for health and safety reasons. Patrick? So option 4 is an option I think we would all just absolutely love if we could have this at some time next year, and that is that students return full-time to school. I know that our students are missing coming to school. They're missing their teachers. I'm looking at their surveys they're completing, and they say, I miss my teacher, I miss school. And our teachers and our staff and our administrators are missing our kids. However, we know that we need to follow the guidance from the Alameda County Public Health Department. And so if we get to the spot where students return to school with traditional class schedules, and we feel that this is probably very unlikely to happen, at least in the fall, but if it did, we would need to continue to have some group size restrictions. This could result in more limited course offerings, and it would likely require that we continue to engage in health and safety screening protocols, such as temperature checks, that there's modified social distancing, grouping restrictions, that face coverings would probably be mandatory, and we would need to ensure that our students are continually washing their hands using hand sanitizer protocols. As well, this would require us to consider having some sort of a staggered model for drop-off and pickup, because we would want to eliminate grouping of students or families that are dropping off their students or waiting to pick up their students. Next slide. So this is just a snapshot of some of our tentative timelines for process and planning. So this past 2 weeks, we've been planning our stakeholder meetings. Tonight, this is one of our meetings. As well, we've convened 2 times with a very large group, which is our school reopening task force that consists of teachers and classified staff and administrators. We've been engaging in some great discussions and reading literature from other countries so that we can find best practices for how we might reopen school. So starting on June 1st to the 26th, we'll continue to have our stakeholder meetings. We'll be closely monitoring the guidance from our health department. We're looking to expand and grow and fully develop our long-term independent study program to make this into a robust option for students. And we'll continue to clarify and define our instructional expectations for the upcoming year. Our hope is that by the end of June to mid-July, we can finalize our plans, share with stakeholders and with our Board of Trustees, making staffing adjustments as necessary and making final touches to our instructional delivery models. By the end of July through August 6th, we look at finalizing our bell schedules. Sites are beginning to plan for the reopening of the school year, however that might look. We're creating plans for professional development for staff and for our faculty. And some really great ideas have surfaced about ensuring that our parents receive some workshops or support to assist them with whatever option they've selected or that we're offering at the time. And then our teachers return to school for professional development on August the 7th. And then August 10th is our first day of school, with school beginning in some way, shape, or form based on these options, or possibly even more that we haven't yet considered, on August 11th. And we will continue, as Ahmad said earlier, to distribute our devices to students so that we can ensure that students have access to the internet. Next slide, please. So for all those who are listening, I'm hoping that you've received the surveys that were emailed out. So our parents and our guardians were sent a school reopening survey yesterday, and I just want to say thank you so much for your participation. Right now, we're up to almost 3,000 responses. And so we are, I've been looking at the data all day long, and it is extremely helpful in informing us as to what parents feel comfortable with going into next school year. As well, our teachers have received surveys, and then our preschool through 5th grade students received surveys that were emailed to their families, and then our 6th grade through our 12th grade students received surveys that were emailed directly to them. We're currently working on a classified survey, and we will be touching base with our administrators to get their input as well. So in the Pleasanton Unified School District, I can tell you that even though our plans are not firmly laid in stone right now, that we are using a very, very thorough process to gain input from stakeholders, because we want to deliver the most excellent program for our students in the fall. And we do that when we work together. So thank you for your participation in these opportunities. So I think I'm passing it now back to Dr. Haglund.
Yeah, I'm trying to get back to it. So Patrick, go to the next slide. I think it just says questions. So where we're at right now, and I appreciate we currently have 669 people or 68 people on the call, and the questions are coming in very rapidly. So we've been collecting them and putting them into a document so that we can spend time creating a question and answers document that will be shared out with the public. I think that, Patrick, we can take away the presentation at this point and just go back to the regular view. There's no way that we'll be able to get to answer all of those questions. There's a lot of them, and they're great questions, but they're going to take some thoughtful, really some thought before we can come up with the right answers that are going to be most helpful to you. So I'd like to address a couple of them very quickly, and then we may jump into a couple more in more detail. But we had approximately an hour scheduled for this, and we got about 10 minutes left for that. So let's take a couple of the high-level questions first. There have been lots of questions about independent study and how that works. And in the survey data that Dr. Woodward talked about, we've seen a fairly decent number of families that have suggested that when school reopens, they may not be completely comfortable with sending their students back, and that they're looking for a potential homeschooling type or virtual school type option, which would fall into that bucket of long-term independent study. So there are specific guidelines that are established by the state of California with regards to delivery of an independent study model. And we have to meet that criterion. For example, no more than 10% of the population of student enrollment in a district can be enrolled in an independent study program. So there's limits to accessibility there. There are, students have to be able to process the information, and so they got to be able to read, which is why the grade limits are a little bit soft or harder on the lower end of the grade scale. When you move into an independent study program, you leave your seat-based program. You enter into contracts with the independent study school, and that contract identifies the amount of work that a student has to submit between appointments, and typically appointments are once per week. If students don't maintain the work progress on those contracts, they cannot stay, and this is by Ed Code, they cannot stay enrolled in independent study. And so there needs to be serious conversations about the ability, both of the family and the child, to be successful in that type of a learning environment. We do know that there are families that are asking about virtual school options. And that is part of our conversation, but that's a program that has to be developed. We don't currently have one. We can create one, but you can imagine that that won't be done overnight. And so the independent study model may serve as a bridge program between our seat-based program and our virtual program when it comes about. There were questions about why we're not just bringing all the kids back, and about whether or not people will have to be wearing masks and whatnot. And I just want to reiterate that guidance, the direction as to how many students we can have in one place at one time, and whether or not they need to wash their hands or use hand sanitizer or wear masks, that is guidance that is given by the public health department. And that would be the same guidance that would be provided to a charter school or to any other educational institution. We're obligated by law to follow that guidance. There were parents that, there was a couple of statements in there that parents, if my child has to wear a mask, I'll do homeschooling. Obviously, those options are available to parents anytime. And we respect your right to raise your children the way you see fit. And we do our best every single day to provide the best education for your child as we possibly can deliver. And I will tell you that the past 2 months have been incredibly difficult on our families. They've been difficult on our kids. They've been difficult on our teachers and the rest of our staff. It's been stressful across the board. We understand that. And no one more than me would like to see us be able to get to a sense of normalcy. Our kids deserve that. And this has shaken their core. It's shaken the core of many families as well. So we are sensitive to the impact that this has had on families. I've had an impact on my family, so I understand it. I don't have little kids, so I'm not having to wrestle with some of the issues that many of you are. And I'm trying really, really hard to be a good listener and to be thoughtful about the impacts that this is having on each of you. But like I said before, we've got to figure out a way to get through this together and to provide the best learning experiences. I don't think it's a single model. I think it's going to be multiple models that we'll have to deliver for a period of time. Initially, it may be more restrictive, or who knows, maybe we'll get a summer gift and the virus will go dormant and we'll be told we can do more, have more kids there. And that's going to be great. But my fear is that we then, get told the exact opposite 2 months later when the flu season reinitiates. So we're trying to be as thoughtful and as nimble as we possibly can in this process. So a question was asked about the difference between the task force and the steering committee. So the task force is a very large group of individuals from all different areas of the organization, and it's a working group. So they're breaking up into groups, they're doing reading, they're reviewing research, and they're trying to work on different areas of the plan. That group meets more frequently and is doing the heavy lifting of the work. The steering committee is a smaller group and functions at a higher level to ensure that we're trying to keep the whole system moving forward together. So that was one of the questions I wanted to answer. There's lots of questions about PE and music and athletics, and currently the restrictions that are placed by the county health department on group sizes and mixing of groups of students, music in particular, large choir, large band and orchestra programs currently are above what the county says we can do in terms of grouping students together. So it's going to be a challenge if that doesn't get relaxed. In PE, you also have large classes. That could be mitigated. We have to function with a concept called social bubbling, which we can share information about at a different time, which means you try to keep kids together with the same kids, and that reduces the spread of the virus. But when you start mixing teams from different communities, you start to compromise the social bubble that's created at the school. So that's the guidance we're getting at the moment. I'm not making any prognostications about the fall. I just want you to know that every time we hear something like that, we're pushing back at the health department and trying to get clarification and advice about other strategies that we could use to mitigate the spread, and still allow students to engage in programs that are incredibly meaningful to them. I know a lot of our high school kids personally, and I've listened to their stories about the number of years that they've spent with their instrument or with their particular sport, and what their goals are, either for their career or just the next level in college, what they want to do in college related to those things, and the scholarships that are associated with that sometimes. And this is challenging everybody's dream for the future, and it breaks my heart. And so we're trying to do everything that we possibly can to motivate the public health department as much as they can to give us increased flexibility, but they have to follow the science. And ultimately, that's what we want them to do. It's because it's what will keep us, keep our kids safe and our staff safe. So there's a few of them. The surveys are out there, and I understand that you might not, so all the language might not resonate with you, and you might want to say something other than what we've provided for you. That's why there's a comment section or an other section with each question. So feel free to populate that with your responses. There's a ton of stuff in this chat that we're going to respond to. But we're running short on time. You guys, the four of you, do you have anything else that you want to add? That would be Ed, Janelle, Julio, or Ahmed.
I'll
And
go
the
ahead.
muting doesn't work. Yes?
So I just want to say thank you to our community who's been so gracious during these last few months. And you've supported your students at home with learning while you were juggling multiple things. And we know that this has been a very heavy lift. We're incredibly fortunate to have the educators here that we do, and our students, we miss them. So I just want to assure you that we will be looking at these questions and be using your feedback, and hopefully giving you some decisions as soon as we feel that we can announce them. So thank you.
So David, I just want to add to, I want to support what you said earlier about all the various stakeholders. We need your voice. Tonight is one of those opportunities, and I'm scanning through the Q&A as well. Some really great questions. But we have staff that work in all of our departments, and obviously our biggest group are teachers. But I really don't want to forget about our classified staff, our health services. We have nurses that we need their expertise. We have our teachers of our youngest kids, our preschoolers, and so forth. So anyway, I just want to agree and support what you said earlier about having voice, giving voice to all of our stakeholders. It's super important.
So David, I just wanted to add a great shout out to everybody for stepping up, but I want to really acknowledge, as Ed has, all of our employees who on less than a week turned a program right into a virtual program for our students in our community. So greatly appreciate that. And I want to shout out to our employees for doing a fantastic job. Thank you.
So the last thing that I'll say before I start to wrap it up is that we've, there have been several questions in the Q&A about the, and Ahmed, I'm sorry, if you wanted to say something, I kind of cut you off there.
No, I just wanted to say that I appreciate, I've been also looking at the comments and I appreciate it. And I think we have to be thoughtful, strategic, and that's what we'll do. And you know, in both in terms of the operational issues and also as we tackle some of the fiscal challenges that we are about to face as well.
Okay, great. So just for fun, changing my background only because I want to say this is what matters the most. We invest in your children over the course of 12 or 13 years in order to get them across that stage. And although we're going to have a great opportunity to celebrate this Friday as we watch virtual graduations and beginning tonight with villages graduations, and then tomorrow with the middle schools. We had middle college last night. Being able to celebrate the successes of students is probably the best part about this job. I got to tell you, my very favorite night is the very last night of the school year, when I get to shake the hands, usually, of every graduating senior as they walk the stage. It breaks my heart to think I'm not going to get that opportunity, because it means something to me personally to see your students succeed in that way. So it's going to be exciting on Friday after watching their virtual graduation ceremonies, to kind of turn on the TV and watch the fireworks celebration that's being presented by our parent organizations and in the city of Pleasanton. It's just a little thing that we can do that's something different than no one else has gotten, because these young people have had to suffer through things that no one else has had to suffer through in a long, long time. And so we're very proud of our graduates and those students that are promoting from 5th and 8th grade, and we want to celebrate them. We hope you'll join us, but we hope you'll do that from home. So remember that this is a stay-at-home celebration. We are broadcasting on channel 30. The fireworks will be there. And some of you are going to be fortunate enough to be able to see them from your backyards. We hope they're shooting them up so high. So join us for that. Also recall that this meeting is the first of 2 town hall meetings. And so we will take your questions that you've posed, and we will develop a question and answer document that will be posted on the website, so you get answers to each of the questions that you posed. And then next time we're going to have different information, and we'll do the same thing by adding questions to that question and answer document. So thank you very much for logging on with us. That was the largest Zoom call I've ever been a part of. And I want to thank you for taking the time to spend with us tonight. So have a great night, and hopefully we'll be back together soon.